All right. Well, for those of you who don't know, my name is Brandon Chosek. I'm the Director of Communications with Special Olympics Missouri. And we are joined today by Zach Paul, according to his fancy little graphics down there, he's the Weather Authority with KRCG 13. So this was something that our athletes were asking for in our Athlete Input Council, is they want to hear from other people out in the community, and specifically what it's like to kind of work at a TV station. So unfortunately, Zach is not working currently at a TV station, working from his home, as you can see. But we wanted to have Zach on because he's a phenomenal supporter of Special Olympics and fundraising, and also just kind of spreading the word about what we do as an organization. But also we wanted to kind of talk about his day job and how things might have changed in the last couple of weeks. So Zach, do you just kind of want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your background and your involvement with SOMO?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Zach Paul. I am the Chief Meteorologist at KRCG 13. We are located in Central Missouri. We cover, well, in fact, here's a fun fact. We are the only CBS station in Missouri that covers strictly Missouri. All the other CBS stations also cover other states. So we are the only one in Missouri that covers strictly Missouri. So fun fact that you get for being in the center part of the state. So my background is I went to school at Mizzou and studied meteorology and atmospheric science, and was fortunate enough to get a job before I had graduated working at KRCG 13, just working weekends at the time. And I have over the years, I am going on 17 years here at the station, and have sort of moved on up from working weekends to the morning show to now working in the evening. So I've covered every single shift and every single day and all hours of the day too, depending on the kind of weather that we get. Sort of my introduction into SOMO really came from work. Growing up, I'm from Independence, which is just outside of Kansas City. So I'm familiar with Special Olympics Missouri and had family friends that were athletes growing up. But as a kid, I didn't know much about it. And it was really once I got to work at KRCG and us being a sponsor for the Polar Plunge at the Lake of the Ozarks, that really sort of got me hooked and got me into the organization. And I was able to sort of take the things that I saw as a child and saw how that worked with the athletes once I became involved in the organization a little bit more, and things just sort of clicked as why you guys are as important as you do and why you guys do the things that you do. And I'm happy to help get the word out and spread the message and do what I can to help.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. So how did you kind of first get involved in meteorology? Like, what was that something you wanted to do since you were a kid, or how did that idea pop into your head?
Yeah, so fun story. I was in third grade at Sycamore Hills Elementary in Independence, and a meteorologist by the name of Brian Busby came to visit my third grade class. And Brian was funny and told some really cool stories. And, when you're a kid in school and you have sort of a presentation, it's always fun because it's kind of like a field trip on your assembly. But I thought it was actually cool. He shared a lot of stuff. He, at the time, gave us old Difax maps of the weather. And that is such an ancient technology at this point. But as a kid, he just brought a bunch of weather maps and let us sort of keep them as souvenirs, which I thought was pretty cool. And I was always interested in science. Didn't really know that I wanted to do weather in third grade necessarily, but it was something that I was, that it piqued my interest, and always was sort of there in the back of my head. And it really wasn't until I got into high school, and it was my senior year of high school, in fact, that I decided that I think this is what I wanted to do. And so I began the path to pursue it.
You mentioned how you went to Mizzou. Why have you stayed at KRCG so long?
Well, it's by luck, really. For most people, when you get into television, you have, some people have dreams that they want to go work at the Weather Channel, or they want to go to work at a network station in New York or Los Angeles. And I never really had big city aspirations in the sense of, maybe the Weather Channel at one point I thought was okay. But I never really wanted to go to New York and do weather. And the longer that I've been in this business, the more I've learned that it's cutthroat. And, there's a lot of challenges that are in this business, and you have to have thick skin. I mean, everybody sits there and everybody's heard the joke that, oh, it must be rough to be the weatherman or must be nice to be the weatherman. You can be wrong every day and still keep your job. So, those jokes that are out there, they're jokes. But some people are pretty vicious with that. And so you have to have thick skin. And it's something that I've learned to develop over the years that, I don't take those things personal. I know that they're not yelling at me. They're just yelling at maybe a crummy situation or something that they're in. But for me, like I said, it's really been luck. I started off working weekends, and within the first year of me working weekends, our morning show meteorologist, Matt Chambers, who's now in St. Louis, he left, and that left an opening. So at the time, I'm like, well, I'm going to apply for that because, in theory, you start working weekends. That's sort of like your first job. Then you'll move up to a mornings, and then you'll, a lot of people aspire to work the evenings. And I was able to do that. And with, I did the morning shift for several years, and still had a couple classes that I needed to finish. And so I was able to work it out with the bosses at the time to take me off the morning show, move me back to the weekends so I could dedicate more time through the week. And so through the week, what I did is I was finishing class, and then I was also doing a lot of community stuff. So I became that community relations or community liaison for KRCG and the community, whether it be going to different events and promoting different events or school visits for that matter. Something that I've not been able to do much of the last few months, but I was able to get a few of them in really before the holidays. And that's something that in the springtime, I'm typically in a school 3 days a week talking about weather. So that's not something I've been able to do much of. So that got me, with that got me connected with the community, and I built a lot of friends or built a lot of relationships and made a lot of friends by being able to sort of step back into the weather role, just working weekends and then just being that community person through the week. And then when the opportunity came to jump up into the evenings, I was interested in it, and they were interested in me having it. And I've been doing it, I think, almost 8 years now as the chief here at the station. So it's not a story that is very common. It's very unique in itself that I've been able to spend my entire career at one station, because most people in television work at a city or at a station for a couple of years and they move on, go somewhere else for a couple of years, and they're constantly moving. And I'm happy here. I like the community, and I've made a lot of friends and family in this area.
What would you, and again, for those of you who are joining us on YouTube or on Facebook, feel free to type a question into the chat boxes if you guys have any questions for Zach, and we'll get those out. Or feel free to join us live in the Zoom link, and the Zoom link is posted to our Facebook right now, and you can ask your question to Zach personally. So what's a normal day like for you when you're in the studio, when we aren't in the middle of a pandemic? Kind of describe your usual day in the studio and how things kind of work for you.
Sure. So a quiet day for me is something that I'll go in sometime, usually between 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's just so I can get in, sort of catch the sort of the temperature, so to speak, of what's going on in the building. How busy is it? Is there big news stories? Is it very quiet? And what's the weather like? Obviously, if it's a quiet weather day, I don't have to rush around as much. So sometimes I can get in as late as 2 o'clock and be fine. But every afternoon we have an editorial meeting where we bring all the reporters, all the anchors, all the staff together, and we talk about what stories that we've been covering so far that day, what are potential stories that we could cover that night, and do we need to expand on potentially some of the stories that we've covered that day. And if it's a quiet news day, we may cover 5 or 6 different stories or try to find different angles on some more complicated stories. And We can use the tornado, for example, and that's still stories that we're working on, even though we're here coming up, about 11 months, 10 and a half months after the initial tornado. We're still working on stories related to that. Not as many as we did immediately afterwards, but using today's environment with the COVID-19. That's something that we're covering every single day. We're covering 5 or 6 different angles. So those are a lot of the topics that we'll discuss in that afternoon meeting. And once we get through the afternoon meeting, and sometimes weather is that story, as mentioned, sometimes weather is going to be the lead story. And then I have a little bit more of a voice and a say of what we're covering, and what I think is more important for our reporters to cover, and what positions maybe they're to be at. So we have a lot of conversations, a lot of dialogue before anything is finalized. But once all those decisions are made, then I can just sort of go hang back out in my office. And my office is removed from the newsroom, so it's kind of in its own little island, so to speak, right off the studio. And it's nice because I can close the door and put on some music and sort of work and just sort of focus and work on the forecast. And when weather's quiet, I can usually get everything done in about 45 minutes to an hour. So that gives me a little bit more free time before our early newscasts that start at 5 o'clock. On busy weather days, it'll take me right up through 5 o'clock. And sometimes I even leave that afternoon meeting early because I won't have enough time to get everything done. We've got radio forecasts that we have to produce for some different radio stations. We have the website that we have to update. There's video clips that we have to put up on the website. And some of that we try to have done ahead of time. And especially if it's a big weather day, if it's a big news story for weather that day, we're going to write up a story and put that up on the website that's going to give you sort of the bullet points of what you can expect. That way you have that first warning before the 5 o'clock news even gets there. You've got that in your hand hours before severe weather may hit. So from what we do, it's more of just strategic planning on making sure that you have the information ahead of time. And then when it hits, then of course we're there on air to let you know. But a quiet day, it's easy to put in a normal 8 to 10 hours. And, I'm usually leaving work sometime about 11:30 on a normal day. So we'll say 1:30 to 11:30 is a normal shift for me on a quiet day. And of course, a busy day, if you've got a school visit that day, sometimes those start 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And if there's weather that happens that night, sometimes you're there till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning covering everything. So days can be long, but it's not every day that happens. So I enjoy the quiet days because the busy days happen, frequently, or more frequently than we'd really want them to happen.
What's your work day like now, working from home? And can you kind of show us your setup that you've got there at home to do everything you need to do?
Sure, yeah. So we'll start with, I get to wear like a polo shirt here, which is kind of nice. And I get to work from my home office upstairs in the attic area here, so to speak. So I'll sort of take the camera and give you a little bit of a tour. So this is the work setup that I have right now. There you guys are. So I have a little tripod set up here in the corner where I can hook my phone up, and this is how we broadcast. So the camera that's on my iPhone, that's what we're using to broadcast that signal back to KRCG so we can get that all on air. But we've got a dual monitor setup. So usually in this big monitor right here, this is where I'm going to have my weather graphics. So I can see that it's right below the camera. So it looks like I'm looking right at my graphics here. And I can keep my email open over here, or if it's a busy weather day, I can keep a chat room that I have with the National Weather Service. Right now I've got Facebook pulled up because I wanted to make sure that I could share all the information here. I've got some just fun little weather stuff. I've got an old Galileo thermometer. It's glass filled with water. Each color represents a different temperature. It's got a different liquid in there that floats at a certain temperature. So kind of cool. Eye drops for the allergies because, it's allergy season. Just sort of a replica microphone. You can see it's encased in foam. That was what I originally used when I would do radio from home. And the foam, of course, helps to deaden the sound to make it a little bit more crisp and clear. And now I've upgraded, and now I've got a little bit better of a setup here with that microphone. So, and otherwise in the background, it's really pretty plain. There's not much back here on the wall. I've got a picture of a thunderstorm, filing cabinets, and a printer, but this is it. I mean, it's really pretty basic as far as the setup that I have here, and really the magic of everything that is happening still happens back at the station. So luckily for me, it takes me a little bit extra. What I've learned is there's just enough latency in me dialing in and remoting into the computer at work that it does allow for me, or I have to allow for about another extra 30 minutes to make sure I get everything done, just because there is a little bit of a lag in some of those things. But it's really pretty simple. It's no different than if I were at, Summerfest, or if we were at the Polar Plunge on that Friday night doing, talking about weather right before we jump in the lake. A lot of the reporters have backpacks that they can broadcast that signal out of. And it's essentially got 7 or 8 different cell phone carriers in there, and they can split that stream up, send it back across the webs and the radio waves. And the difference is I just have the one. I just have the one phone here, the one carrier, and it sends it out via cellular. And if you have Wi-Fi, it can tap into Wi-Fi, which will help keep the signal a little bit cleaner because it can split it up. And then we have a device back at the station that marries all of that data back together into one stream, and it looks pretty clean. And it's about a 3-second delay from where I'm at to the station. If you're out in some rural areas where the cell service may not be as good, they may have to make that about an 8 or a 9-second delay. And then we wear an earpiece. So I've got that earpiece in now, and I'm able to listen to you guys. But I have a producer that sits back at the station and cues me. So that way I know we're at 3 seconds, and that way there's not a big gap in conversation between Kermit or whoever may be in the anchor chair and whoever's out in the field.
So no fancy green screen? I figured you'd have some PVC pipe and some green sheets or something.
We tested all of this out, and this is something that I've tested this before this whole COVID-19 thing sort of came up. I was always looking for ways to do live weather and make it better. And these are some of the things that we had come up with. So we could do a green screen. The only problem that we have with doing a green screen out in the field is I don't know where I'm at necessarily in front of the screen. So when we're in the studio, we have little TV monitors off to the side, and what you see at home is the exact same thing I see. But because of the delay I already mentioned with the transmission with the camera, by the time that signal gets back to me via rabbit ears, even just going old school free over the air, it's still about a 15 to 17 second delay from the time I say it to the time it would actually show up on the TV back here. So the green screen doesn't work as well, but being able to put me in dual boxes does. So they'll pull my screen up pretty quick, and it'll look a little something similar to this. So
okay.
they'll have my graphics would be there in that black box, and then I would be over to the side and would be able to look like I'm looking and referencing what's going on in that screen, when in reality it's on the screen right here in front of me.
You need to update your date.
Yeah, that's the last time I really used that program.
So what's your favorite part about being a meteorologist?
I love being able to just talk weather. There are a lot of questions that people have with the weather, and if I have an answer and I can help somebody out with that, we'll do it. I've had students at various schools contact me and say, "Hey, I have a weather question. I'm working on this project for school. Can you help me?" And the irony is I've had some of the teachers email me back and say, "This student did exceptionally well, but they said they got help from you. Is that right?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we worked over this. We, did like a little email chat back and forth. He showed me some pictures and we got some stuff done." And just to verify that the student wasn't making up this stuff. So it's really just being involved, engaged in the community, and my job really it is an educational sort of position too, because the weather does affect everybody, whether you want it to or not. Everybody is affected by the weather, and if I can help shed some sunshine on that, then I love to do that.
So that's kind of an opportunity. This is an opportunity to kind of make the segue between weather and Special Olympics. And obviously everybody know what happened last May with our Training for Life campus being hit and the rest of Jefferson City being hit a lot harder than our campus. So kind of just take us through that day from your perspective, and what was going through your mind as you were trying to stay as calm as possible, just everything that was kind of going on in our mind at the time.
Sure. So I remember even leading up to the day, it was pretty hectic. We had severe weather the night or two beforehand. And what most people don't realize is, in fact, the night of May 21st, our tower was struck by lightning. So typically at the station, I've got, at any given point, I have 4 positions that I can do weather from in our building. One of them being the weather office, and then 3 of them inside the studio itself. And of course, that's all done by different technology that just allows me to have access to a remote computer on the other side of the room. Well, with the tower being struck by lightning, that actually fried a lot of my equipment. I was very lucky that it didn't impact any of my weather graphics and any of that system, but it did impact, in fact, it impacted the 3 different remote spots that I could have access to in the studio. So very fortunate that once our engineers got our signal back on air, because first of all, that was priority number 1, was making sure our signal could get back out over the air for people to watch. He came to me and said, all right, now what was it that you had? And I told him, and fortunately he was able to run to Best Buy the next day and at least get me 1 station hooked up. And that was the station that you typically, if you've watched the news, it's me standing there in the weather center at the desk. He was able to get that desk console hooked up so I could at least look into a camera and look down and have access to my graphics. He was able to get that hooked up, and for that, like, he busted his butt. And those guys behind the scenes deserve a lot of credit for making sure that stuff got taken care of. So then we'll fast forward and get to May 22nd, because at that point everything's working. We were anticipating severe weather again that day, and to be honest, a lot of that day is a blur for me, especially from the time that we went on air. I can tell you we went on air about 7:10 that night, and I got off air about 5:15 to 5:30 the next morning. And obviously in between there, I remember we had there was the first tornado that was starting up near Marshall, and then it moved to the east. Howard County up near Armstrong, which is not far from Fayette, they had a confirmed tornado there. There was another one that was reported up near Huntsville, which is not far from Moberly. There was one that was heading right into Columbia. And this is all before 10 o'clock, and not all of them were confirmed. The Armstrong tornado was confirmed up near Fayette. I do believe there was a small little spot up near Huntsdale too that headed up there in Randolph County, not far from Moberly. As far as from the Columbia area, there wasn't, but that storm had produced that tornado in Armstrong, and so it continued its cycle and moved through, and luckily nothing happened there. And I think they had some rain and a little bit of hail, and maybe some light wind damage, but nothing catastrophic. And then we get to about 10 o'clock, and things actually looked quiet for a hot minute. And I remember things looking quiet and thinking, okay, I can catch my breath. The 10 o'clock news was starting. I had been on air already for about 3 hours straight at that point. I needed a drink of water. I had to go to the bathroom.
Just a drink of water?
Yeah, just a drink of water. You gotta keep going, because I knew it wasn't done, But we were at a point that I'm like, I can catch my breath and sort of regroup, and I needed that, and I needed that minute. So we were luckily able to um, have Kermit hop in. He read a couple of the top head stories while I ran and got a glass of water, went to the bathroom. We came back. I did sort of an abbreviated weather that included the 7-day forecast. And then we went to sports, and Rod was able to get some sports in, and then news was over at 10:30. And at that point, I remember looking at that storm south of Eldon going, this thing is getting bigger. And I remember the last thing I said before we got off air was, if you're in Eldon, you need to keep an eye on this storm. It has gained its strength. At the time, I think it had just had a thunderstorm warning issued right before we went off air for the 10 o'clock news. So for like that 15, 20 minutes during the newscast, there weren't any warnings. And then that thunderstorm warning popped up for Miller County there just to the west of Eldon. And within about 5 to 7 minutes, it became a tornado warning. And after that 5 to 7 minutes, I think 10, 12 minutes later, it actually was moving into the town of Eldon. So from that point, I've covered hundreds of tornadoes. We've done this I've done this. I have hours and hours and hours of severe weather coverage and cutting into coverage and looking at a storm and saying, yeah, this is a serious storm. And we're looking at a storm and saying, you know what, I think this one's not going to pan out. And, it's especially dangerous when it's at night. Again, we're talking at 10:30 at night when this all started. And if it's middle of the afternoon, there's a lot more eyes. You can see things. At night, things become a little bit more difficult because it's dark. And, I think a lot of meteorologists, myself included, will probably sound the alarm a little bit higher at night, especially based on what we were seeing. And then, as I mentioned here just a minute ago, I can pull up a chat room that I have with the National Weather Service and different emergency managers. And when I saw that all of a sudden power was out in Eldon, I knew that that's when things just got real. We have these tornado warnings that happen at night all the time, and they don't. They rarely produce a tornado. This one was different, and when the info was coming in that Eldon was without power, we could switch over and look at some different things on our radar, and that radar, the stuff I'm talking about, shows us if there's actually debris in the tornado, or if we're still looking at rain or hail inside that thunderstorm. And by the time it had moved through Eldon, there was actually debris starting to show up on the radar. And what's unusual about central Missouri is we're in a little bit of what's called a radar hole. And by that is the three main radar sites for the state are in Springfield, Kansas City, and St. Louis. And so all three of them cover central Missouri really well. The problem is the radar beam doesn't shoot flat. It actually shoots up at a little bit of an angle. So the farther away you get, the higher up you get. So all three of those radars hit mid-Missouri anywhere between a mile to 2 miles up with coverage. So it can be difficult to see any low-level rotation, but you'll see a lot of the mid-level rotation, which is what we see a lot. But the fact is that tornado kept getting closer to Jeff City, that debris was starting to show up at 11 and 12,000 feet. And, we're talking at that point, it's showing up 2 miles in the air with inside that thunderstorm. And that's usually indicative that it's a pretty strong tornado. The updrafts are just carrying anything that's in its path and just hurling it up into the storm. And I just remember it kept getting bigger and bigger, and the circulation that we were looking at on the radar, we kept looking between the velocity, and the velocity are actually just the winds inside that thunderstorm. But the winds were spinning really pretty fast, and they were doing it in a pretty tight location. And that's something else that you typically don't see at 10,000 feet. So we were pretty confident that this was a tornado that was on the ground, especially once we started getting reports of power flashes. We started seeing some of the debris showing up on the radar. And for me, noticing that it was just tracking right up 54, it was heading into a populated area. It's pretty rural between Eldon and Jeff City. And, you're going to have a lot of damage in a lot of those places. And it may only be to some outhouses, some barns, and some things like that, which, it's devastating to those that own that property. But that compared to moving into Jefferson City or into a large populated area, especially at the time, it's night, most people are in bed asleep. And not everybody has weather radios, and not everybody has a way to get that warning information. Most homes have a smoke detector to tell you when there's a fire going on in your house to wake you up to get you out. Not every home has that storm detector. And that's something that has concerned me. And that's why we do this big weather radio campaign, and we have for the last several years. And we've had weather call, and we still have weather call. And those are tools that you can get to make sure you get that information. And it was in my mind, I was thinking the worst case scenario as the storm was heading into Jeff City. I really was. It was night, people are sleeping, knowing that probably only 25% of the homes have some sort of a warning detection. The advantage that a lot of us have now are on our cell phones. We do get some of those emergency alerts that pop up. The phones, they all have a built-in, stock weather app. That app isn't great. And those apps, a lot of people turn off all that information, and so you can't get it. So even if you were to have one of those apps, if you turn off the information, it's not going to wake you up. And it was hurting my heart. And it was probably the hardest day I've had at work, covering severe weather, knowing that it was heading into a populated area, and it was going to, was hitting the town that I love, and it's now my home. And I've got a lot of friends and family that live here. And, the difficult part is my job is to stay calm and to show you the facts and tell you the facts and alert those ahead of this to what's going on. In the meantime, you've got to push down all that emotion that you're feeling, because you can't worry about that, because you've got people ahead of this that you could still get that information to. And so, I would be extremely wrong if I didn't say that I didn't have a tear or two coming down my face during the middle of all that, because it was extremely tough, not knowing, and knowing sort of the areas that it hit. It hit another low income area in Jefferson City, and that's an area even to this day that is still just very blighted, with homes still not being repaired, no tarps over them. I mean, there's still some of them that still have couches and televisions sitting in the nightstand if you were to drive through some of those neighborhoods. And it's heartbreaking even to this day that it's still like that. But the reality of it is whatever warning information, most people had that. I have talked to a few people that said that they didn't know it happened until they woke up. And they have all said, I feel very fortunate and lucky that nothing happened to me while I was sleeping. A few others have said that, we took warning. We knew it was coming. You guys have talked about it for a day or two, which is always great when people get that information. And so, it's tough. Like I said, it's been the toughest day of my career, but my job is to stay calm in those situations and not invoke panic or invoke fear on what could be the worst day that somebody is having. My job is to at least try to instill some calm and some facts, so that way you can still at least take that knowledge and make your own informed decision with it.
We did a great job, for sure. And Jefferson City is better for having you as our meteorologist, that's for sure. So kind of moving on to the Special Olympics Missouri specific question. A lot of our athletes are live streaming. They are doing some workouts for us. We have workouts at 10 and 4 every day. We've got leadership and life skills courses, which is the time slot that you're taking up today. So what advice do you have for our athletes who are really kind of just playing around with videography and live streaming and just kind of getting into that technical world? because we've done a Special Olympics Missouri TV show for a couple of years, and our athletes are like, they're really interested in video editing and doing some of these things. They've just never really been given the opportunity. They didn't get a chance to learn these things in school like you and I did. They're all learning now, hands-on. So what advice would you have for those athletes who are live streaming or doing some video or just kind of learning new things in this time, that you may have some kind of wisdom that you can pass on to them?
Well, the wisdom I would have and the wisdom I would share is keep practicing. Because yeah, like I learned some basic skills in college about this, but this is not what I learned in college. I learned some of this on the job from other people, as far as like some basic editing skills. But there are some pretty basic stuff out there that's free. And Brandon, I know you and I were talking about that here just a little bit ago, that now that I'm working at home, I don't have access to all those fancy editors and equipment to do different videos. So there are some free things that are out there. And the one that I use is made by XSplit. Not that I'm endorsing it in any way, but it is one that has worked for me. And it is pretty simple and it's pretty easy to use, I have found. But you've got to play around with it. You've got to practice. Keep taking your camera, keep shooting some different video, and then come in and edit it. And, maybe you try to, for a simple test, if you're taking video, hold it still, and then towards the end, move it just a little bit. Come back into the editor to see if you can't remove that little camera move. So that way it's still, and it doesn't move there at the end. Start off with some of those basic edits, just some simple stuff. And that gets you familiar with the keys on the keyboard, because each key may do something different. And just play around with it. I tell this to my guys at work when they come in. I'm like, play with it, because you probably aren't going to break it. And if you do, we're all going to learn something new today. And, I don't think that is too far off from the truth, because at least in today's environment, I think we're all learning and adapting and doing something new that we've not done before, and maybe a little bit out of our comfort zone. But the more we do this, the better off we're going to be, and the more familiar we'll be with it when it comes time to actually do everything. So just keep playing with it. That's the best thing I have. And when you get that figured out, make something a little bit more complicated. Maybe put something in the middle and see if you can't try to match up some of the seams together from two different video cuts. And I think there's a couple different basic editing things that you could practice in the short term to get better at it in the long term.
And I think that was what was cool about you showing us your setup at home, is it's nothing more than just your phone as your main camera. It's not, you don't have a $10,000 HD 4K camera. It's just, you're just using your phone. And I think that's something that our athletes can.
iPhone 7. It's not even an XR,
oh, it's not even a 10.
XL.
Wow.
No, man, this is old school. It is an iPhone 7. So
yeah, I think our athletes can learn from that, that you use whatever you've got. And in the world of video editing and technology, use whatever you've got, and you just make it look the best that you can. So that's good.
And especially now, because it's difficult to make things look pretty sometimes. If you've got the expensive equipment, that's great. It makes things look crisp and clean. If you don't worry about it. That's something that you can refine and work on down the road. And I think you'd probably agree with me on this. Editing is pretty important in this whole process too, because you can take some bad shots and edit them the right way to make everything look clean once you get good at it.
Mm-hmm. So for those of you, again, who are still watching on YouTube or on Facebook, feel free to ask some questions. We're going to kind of cut it short here. We've got about 10 minutes or so left. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section on Facebook or on the YouTube Live. A couple last things, Zach. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the super plunge. And for those of you who don't know, Zach is a super plunger. And not just a super plunger, but you are the what this year?
I'm the champion this year.
Yeah. The reigning
Not
champ.
only that, they're going to put an asterisk. The other super plungers are putting an asterisk, I think, in the record book for this year, because I was sick. I caught the flu. right before the plunge. So I only got to do a couple of them this year and not all 24.
Ah.
So a couple of them are going to have a comment to say about that.
So just tell me, like, how did you first get involved with specifically with the polar plunge? You started out as running in the polar strut. Is that correct?
Yes, I came down. I did the plunge 1 year and went, nope, I'm not doing this. I see they have a 5K. I'm going to do the 5K because at the time I ran a lot more frequently than I do today. And that was back on the old course before before the new highway went through. And there was a lot of ups and downs in that course. And I went out and ran it like I was, an avid runner and hadn't trained. And I hurt for about, a good hour afterwards, and then was sore for a couple days. And with the plunge, it was really only uncomfortable for about that 30 seconds that I was in the water. And then once I dried off, it was great. I was back to normal. So I quickly told myself that the plunge is the way to go, not that 5K. And especially now that I don't want to tell people not to do the 5K. Don't get me wrong. It's a challenge. And the new course they have now, it's uphill both ways. So I didn't think that was possible, but somehow I think Pete figured out a way to make that course uphill both ways. And one of them is a steep incline. The other one is a gradual incline for about 1.5 miles. So it's also a tough course, but we do that one. And in fact, actually, I guess it was 2 years ago, they changed it again out of the park, and it's a straight uphill. So it's a challenge. If you like running and you like a challenge hill course, this is definitely the 5K for you. But not for me. So I do the plunge because I can get in, I can get out. And once you're out and you can towel off, it's actually quite a bit better. So it doesn't, it's not as miserable as you think it is. And I would encourage anybody that's ever thought about doing it to just come out and do it. Get a buddy, come out and do it. And if you're thinking about it and you need some encouragement, come down and watch us. And then you can decide there if you want to do it with the plunge on Saturday, and they'll gladly accept your donation to go out and jump in the lake. It's a cool thing. I enjoy doing it. We all, and I say we all the super plungers, we all moan and groan every year about, oh, it's that time of year again. But you know what? We all happily do it, and we do it with a smile on our face. I think Crystal, I see you shaking your head or nodding your head. Yes. So yeah, you would agree with us.
But why do it 24 times in 24 hours? What is it about the super plunge that makes it better than just doing the regular old plunge?
Well, that's a good question. I can tell you how I got into it, and that may be the easiest thing. And some of it's going to come down, I think, with guilt. I think Crystal does a good job of guilting some of us into this. But I got into the plunge with KRCG since we were the sponsor for it. And there was one year, there was so much going on in weather that I didn't get an opportunity to promote it like I usually do and talk about it through my forecast. And it happened to be the week of the plunge. And Crystal has been working on me for probably 3 or 4 years at that point you should be a super plunger. You should be a super plunger. And I'm like, nope, one time is good enough. One time is good for me. And this year, or that year, like I said, I had forgot to talk about it on air. And I made the comment of, you know what, if I can get to $1,000 by the end of the week, I'll sign up to be a super plunger next year. And that next afternoon, I got a phone call from a company in Jeff City that decided to just go ahead and we've got your $1,000 for you. So Carson and Coyle, law firm here in Jeff City, they had all their employees pull together money to come up with that $1,000, and they're the reason that I got into doing this super plunge. And like I said, ever since then, it's been Crystal that keeps guilting us to come back and do more. And one of my good friends, another super plunger, JT Geralt, he works for KS95 radio and Versailles. I don't know how it started, but there's this contest between us now on this to see which one of us can raise the most money. And that's been fun to sort of play out over the years. This is only the second year, so I can use the term champion this year. It's not something I've been able to do frequently in the past of doing the super plunge. JT's done a great job raising money over the years, and when I think I'm having a record year, JT has somehow managed to squeak out an extra $1,000 or $2,000 to beat me. So I pat him on the back for doing what he does. But that sort of, I think, is just motivation between both of us to who's going to outdo who which year.
I'm actually surprised you don't have your hashtag at the bottom of your screen.
Oh. Well, here, I can get this. Let me do this. This is right around the corner here. Maybe I lied.
This makes for great live TV, Zach.
Well, it's going to be worth it. It's going to be totally worth
Okay.
it.
Okay.
This trophy.
Oh, very
The champion
nice.
trophy here.
Very nice.
So I keep it with my plunge corner that I have over here. But since we've remodeled and painted the upstairs, everything's in a different location right now. So, but champion, JT, champion.
That's
Crystal,
probably one of my favorite parts of Super Plunge is that competition between you and JT, because you guys do it from the beginning of the minute you guys sign up. There starts that hashtag from one of you. Usually JT starts it somewhere, but they never miss an opportunity to post that someplace.
Yeah, and JT's done good with it. Yeah, I think he's the one that started all the hashtag stuff, and he's had a couple T-shirts, and I give him props and a pat on the back for his creativity on how to raise money to beat me, because they're great ideas. Like I said, trying to put T-shirts and in fact T-shirts both years, and one of them, or this year, the most recent one has his picture on it. So, but he doesn't like his photo.
Yes.
Crystal, do you have any questions for Zach of things that I didn't cover?
I don't think so. You asked him about the Super Plunge and how he got started with that, and didn't know I was going to be thrown under the bus for guilting him into it. But no, really, Zach, we do appreciate you and everything you do, even beyond the plunge and the Super Plunge, coming out and emceeing our events. And Zach was our host of our Ladies Night Out event in Jeff City this past year, and that was a lot of fun. He did a great job with that. But I know our athletes that have met you, they adore you. Sarah thinks you are the best thing on earth, and you are so good to them and so gracious to take the time to work with them and talk to them. And so we really do appreciate you.
Well, absolutely. I'm happy to do it, and the athletes are the reason why. And they're great. And yeah, a lot of them will come up and talk, and I enjoy it. Even Sydney gave me a hard time this year.
Yeah, she did.
So.
Yeah.
So I guess the last question I have is we'll just end it on like what message would you like to share kind of with all of our athletes at this time? Not necessarily specific to kind of staying indoors or staying at home, but just what message do you have to our athletes from your perspective as a donor, as a volunteer, and as a fan of Special Olympics? If you had a chance to kind of address all of our athletes, what message would you have for them?
Well, I'd say keep doing what you're doing is the easiest thing. You guys are the reason why we do this, and the smile and the joy that you guys always have on your face, keep that, because that's contagious. The positive attitudes, the camaraderie, the friendships, and the livelihoods that you guys are building amongst each other, that's contagious, and that spreads, and that makes other people want to be involved. And you guys are doing a good thing, and I enjoy helping you guys out, and thank you for what you guys do.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Zach. And again, everybody who's watching this live or after the fact, feel free to, Zach's got his fancy little bug at the bottom with his Twitter and Facebook account. Oh, yeah, look at that. So feel free to give him a follow and as just echoing what Crystal said, thank you for everything that you've done for us, Zach, and we'll look forward to when we can eventually be back together again. So
Yeah,
thanks to everybody
in person next time.
Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll be back with more SOMO at home stuff over the next couple of days and weeks. Take care, everybody.